everyone, and welcome back to another episode of What the Forensics. My name is Nicole, and as always, as you've come to know, I am joined by the wonderful Journey and Rebecca. This week, Journey is going to be telling us about the case of the Gilgo Beach 4 and the LISK, and LISK. It's the Long Island serial killer. Yeah, the Long Island serial killer. I'm excited. I know we covered this, what did we say, 4 years ago now?
Yeah.
3 years ago. But there's been some updates in the case since then, which I'm very excited to learn about because I haven't actually read any of it. But before we begin, if you like listening to us, you want to help us out, please leave us a review and or comment. Make sure your apps are auto-downloading if you would want to. We would love that. We can only see downloads and not listens, so it does really just... One, it's a little more morale boost to see the amount of people listening to us, but it does just show that people are listening and are interested in what we're doing, and then it motivates us to keep kind of doing this stuff for you guys. So we really appreciate it. And like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you can. With that out of the way, doesn't happen often. No listener's discretion advised, though, this episode. Obviously still can be a challenging conversation at times, but no detailed descriptions of much from my understanding at the moment. So with that, Journey, would you like to take us on this lovely journey of a case?
Yeah, definitely. I do just want to start off by saying that because this case involves the death of many sex workers, it's important for us to understand that sex workers and other people can be victimized and do experience violence. Sex work does not make sex workers victims. Sometimes they're victims of crime, and this victimization should be recognized as the crime that it is. And unfortunately, in a criminalized context, when sex workers are victims of crime, not only is the violence against them seen as inevitable, but also their legal rights are not respected. And we see that a lot in this case. Mm-hmm. And so I'd just like to say that sex workers are people and they deserve justice regardless of what job they chose or were forced into. So please just keep that in mind as we discuss this case. That being said, I'm just going to kind of go through it as a timeline. It's easiest for everyone, even though it might be a little confusing at the start. So we have to go all the way back to 1993. On November 19th, Sandra Costilla, who is 28, disappears in New York. Then very next day, on November 20th, 1993, Sandra's body was found by two hunters 60 miles northeast of Gilgo Beach in a wooded area of Southampton. She was found lying on her back with her arms outstretched over her head, and her uncovered legs were spread apart. Her shirt had been pulled up over her torso and head, and she had numerous sharp force injuries to her face, torso, breast, left thigh, and vaginal area. In 2014, it was thought that she was murdered by John Bitrolf, but the hairs found in her body did not match him or anyone he lived with, so he was excluded as a suspect. I also think we should do an episode on him because he was active in the same area and at the same time as a Long Island serial killer. And so there's a bit of overlap in their cases.
Oh, so that guy, he wasn't an innocent suspect. Like, he was still technically a criminal.
Yeah, he did kill people, but just not Sandra.
Gotcha.
Okay. Noted.
Yeah. And then we jump ahead 3 years to February 14th, 1996. Karen Vergata, who is 34, disappears while working as a sex worker in Manhattan. She was living in Manhattan at the time, and sadly, no one reported her missing. On November 19th, 2000, hunters were walking around the wooded area of Manorville, New York, and at 10:50 a.m., they came across a black plastic bag wrapped with duct tape. They opened the bag and saw more black plastic bags with a set of human remains. They called 911, and the police came to examine the remains. And what they found was a decapitated torso, missing hand severed at the wrist, and her right foot. We later learned that her right foot was actually removed because it had a tattoo of her son's name on it. And her torso, legs, and arms were bound with rope. The forensic anthropologists and pathologists were able to determine that she had been deceased for 2 to 8 weeks prior to being found. So it's thought that she died on or between September 1st to November 19th, 2000. July 21st, 2003, At 8:41 p.m., Jessica Taylor called her mother and made plans to go visit her on the 25th of July for her mother's birthday. At 10:22 p.m., she called someone else for only 2 minutes. And then after that, there were no incoming or outgoing calls. And she was last seen at the Port Authority bus terminal in Manhattan. And at that time, she was working in Midtown Manhattan as a sex worker.
I haven't heard much of the Port Authority bus terminal, but for some reason it's come across on social media before, and I think it's not a great place.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I think that just goes for every bus terminal.
Yeah, they can be a little shady at times.
Because we find, especially in
just a lot of movement
Calgary,
of people. Yeah.
In Calgary specifically, the closer you get to the train stations, the more crime in the area. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I feel like there is some sort of correlation between public transit terminals and crime.
Yeah. Just the amount of people it brings in.
Yeah.
Different types of people from different places congregating one area. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, she was last seen at the Port Authority bus terminal. And then on the 25th, she didn't show up to her mother's. So her mother called law enforcement and reported her missing. The very next day, a dog walker came across what they thought were human remains and called 911. Police came out and saw a deceased woman laying on her back with her legs bent underneath her. She had been decapitated and her arms had been removed below the elbows. Her head and arms were not present at the scene. And there was a tattoo on her side that had been kind of removed and scratched and kind of, they used the term obliterated, but that felt
extreme.
Wrong. Yeah.
Just a lot.
Yeah. Anyway, these remains were identified as 20-year-old Jessica Taylor. Additionally, a witness had observed a dark-colored Chevrolet pickup truck backed into the wooded area where Jessica's body was found at 10:30 p.m. the night before. So the first sighting of the Long Island serial killer. We jump ahead a few years to July 6, 2007, when Maureen Brainerd Barnes' cell phone was contacted by a prepaid cell phone. I switched between prepaid and burner. It's just a cell phone you buy with minutes already on it. And for the next 3 days, there were 16 interactions between her cell phone and this prepaid burner phone. And that weekend, she took the train into Manhattan, and at one point, she had called a friend from the Port Authority bus terminal again to say that she had been robbed of all the money she had earned and needed a ride home, but her friend wasn't able to come and get her. And that was the last time anyone heard from her. And it was July 9th that she was last seen on. So she was in town for the whole weekend before disappearing on the 9th. It was also said that she had gone into town with a friend that she normally took on calls kind of as security and just to have each other's back. But her friend ended up leaving early this time. So I'm curious to see if the person she had called was that same friend who had ended up leaving early, who she brought with her for security.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Either way, there was no cell phone activity until July 12th when there were 2 outgoing calls to her voicemail. So the killer was checking her voicemail.
I was going to say, how do you call your voicemail? But yeah, if you check your voicemail, that's calling your voicemail.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And then 2 days later, she was reported missing by a friend. Maureen, who was 25 at the time, was a single mother of 2 and lived in Norwich, Connecticut. In 2006, she had seen an ad for modeling on the web and had sent in pictures of herself. And one of the friends she made in the process introduced her to sex work on Craigslist, which she did until she became pregnant with her second child. And then as soon as she was able to start working again, she started up after giving birth. And then on July 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 10th of 2009, Melissa Barthelme was contacted by the same burner phone. So the same burner, not the same burner phone in Maureen's case, but just the same burner phone connected her on those 4 days.
I see.
She was last seen alive on July 10th, 2009 at the age of 24 on her way to a Craigslist appointment in Long Island, New York. On July 18th, she was officially reported missing by her mom. Melissa had moved from Buffalo, New York to New York City to work as a hairdresser in 2007. Her goal was to make enough money to eventually open her own salon. However, her mother thinks that the salon that she was currently working at was a cover for her quote-unquote pimp and led her to working as a sex worker. I believe she also was a stripper during that time as well. But yeah. And then on July 17th, July 23rd, August 5th, August 19th, and August 26th, her family received calls from her phone number. And her youngest sister, Amanda, who was 15 at the time, answered them. And the man said, "Is this Melissa's little sister? And I hear you're a half-breed." Amanda's father was black. So already we don't like this person.
Mm-hmm.
He would also ask her questions like, "Do you know what your sister did for a living? Are you going to be a whore like your sister?" And then on the last phone call on August 26th, he told Amanda that he killed Melissa, saying, quote, "Do you think you'll ever see her again? You won't. I killed her," end quote. And then he hung up.
Why? It's fascinating to see this escalation, though, because he's not talking to anyone else prior to this that we know of, at least. And now he's like taunting it in this little girl's face.
Right? And so I don't know if he knew, like he obviously must have known what Amanda looked like. So yeah, it was just very, very weird. And he would also describe in graphic detail everything he had done sexually to Melissa. So really quite traumatizing for your 15-year-old sister to hear.
Yeah.
Amanda and her mother really worried that this caller knew where they lived. So they did end up moving shortly after. And Amanda said that he sounded calm and control and that he knew what he was doing. She also said that he didn't have an accent and that he sounded white and was probably in his 30s or 40s, most likely. Which we come to find out, very accurate description. And the police were able to trace these phone calls to Midtown Manhattan. Moving forward to May 1st, 2010. This is kind of the person who went missing who started all of it. Her name was Shannon Gilbert, and she had started sex work in her 20s as a way to earn money while trying to make it as a singer. She had been living in New Jersey with a boyfriend and had initially signed on with an escort agency before realizing that she could make more money posting ads on Craigslist.
Do you know, like, a escort agency, is that going to differ drastically than, say, you have just a pimp that has his woman kind of thing? Like, it's definitely, not definitely, but it may be more laid out and more ethical and more standardized, I guess.
Supposedly, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's just a little bit more legitimate.
Okay.
In theory, I use legitimate very loosely,
Right.
but I'm not 100% sure.
Because I know there's like... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. On that pamphlet that you sent me, I do believe it specifies the difference.
Oh, okay. I'll look into that.
Which we'll have on our website as well, but I don't remember.
Because I know there are like ranches, I think they're called, in like Nevada, I think it is, where it's legal to conduct sex work. I don't know if that's the proper terminology there, but they take like proper precautions. All of the women are like tested. They have all of the right protections in place. So I was just wondering if like the escort agency would be something similar to that. If you knew.
Yeah.
I would hope.
I am not sure.
I would hope.
Yeah. I would hope so too, but I have no idea.
Okay.
Either way, on May 1st, she had her driver, Michael Pack, drive her to a client's house in a quiet gated community in Oak Beach, Long Island. A lot of the women had drivers who also doubled as security.
Smart.
And so Pack waited outside the house, and a source says that Shannon and her client ended up leaving the house for about 15 minutes. And it's theorized that they were looking for drugs, but no one really knows. And then at 5 a.m., the client came out of the house and asked Pack for help. They went back inside to find Shannon panicking and on the phone with 911. She had called 911 at 4:51 a.m. because she believed that someone was after her and going to kill her, and was on the line with the dispatcher for 23 minutes. She sounds obviously very, very distressed. She never ends up telling the dispatcher specifically where she was at the time, so they couldn't send like a police car to her.
Right.
And you can hear on the 911 call, Pac is trying to like get her to leave with him, but she won't. And then the client is trying to get them out of the house. He's like, I'm done with this. I don't want you here anymore. But she is afraid to go out in the dark in the middle of nowhere with both of them because she's convinced that they've conspired to kill her. It's quite a call to listen to. And anyway, he tried to get her to leave and she wouldn't. He then just like went back to it. He was like, fine, whatever. I'm going back to the SUV, and just like sat in the driveway and just waited for her. Mm-hmm. Not very long after that, he saw Shannon run out of the house and just book it down the road. So he followed her in the SUV, and she kept running and yelling for help. And she started banging on one of the neighbors' doors, and he let her in and offered to call the police, but she asked him not to for whatever reason. Okay. She then ran out of his house and back down the street. Pac then spent the next hour driving around the community searching for her before giving up and just like going back to the city. So this great. Neighbor whose house she went into did end up calling the police at 5:22 a.m. And another neighbor whose house she was also knocking on the door of called at 5:30, and the police showed up at 5:40 a.m. There's actually a movie based on her disappearance called Lost Girls. It's on Netflix. I thought it was really well done. They really focus on the fact that she called at 4:51 a.m. and the police didn't show up until an hour later, and it should not have taken them an hour to get there.
Yeah. It seems like they only came when the neighbors called too. Like they weren't listening to what she was saying. It was just we've got multiple reports from other respectable people, so now we'll go check it out.
Right. And she never told them where she was. Like she didn't know where she was. They couldn't, like they were trying to, you can hear on the 911 call, the operators trying to figure out like what county she's in and where she is, because all she says is she's in Long Island. She doesn't specify where in Long Island. So I think that definitely added to the delay.
Do we know, just because I have no reference, and this could just be nonsense, but what would the technology be like in terms of 911 dispatchers and like connecting to cell towers, say, or like trying to locate a caller?
Not great, because Shannon does ask the 911 dispatcher, like, can't you trace my call? And the 911 dispatcher is like, I cannot actually.
Okay, that makes sense.
But you can, like, they are doing as much as they can with the information that Shannon's giving them, because a lot of the conversation was just Shannon talking to the client and Pac.
Right.
And so, that's pretty much everything that happened May 1st. On June 5th, Megan Waterman, who is 22 and the mother to 3-year-old Liliana Waterman from Scarborough, Maine, was contacted by a burner phone which had just been activated that same day. She was also working as a sex worker, and her mother believes that Megan was forced into sex work by her boyfriend, Akeem Cruz, and supposedly he worked as her pimp and accompanied her on calls and posted Craigslist ads for her. However, Megan always denied being a sex worker and said that she was just dancing, but her family didn't believe her and were worried for her safety. Mm-hmm. On June 6, 2010, Megan was last seen leaving the Holiday Inn Express in Hauppauge, Long Island. I don't know if I said that right.
Why is it spelled like that?
I don't know.
Hauppauge.
I'm really not sure. And so she was seen leaving the Holiday Inn Express on for a Craigslist call on June 6th at around 1:30 a.m. Okay. There's video footage of her leaving, and that's around the same time that she was contacted by that burner phone number again. So she had been in contact up to and then also as she was leaving the hotel. Her boyfriend was with her that night, but didn't go with her and was somehow not there when she was missing. So her mother is very firmly convinced that he was in on what was happening, whatever that was. He has never cooperated with detectives about what he knows about that night and is back in prison for unrelated crimes. And Megan was reported missing on June 8th by her family. And then on September 1st, 2010, Amber Costello, who was 27 years old and also a sex worker at the time she went missing, she was contacted by a burner phone late that night. Her sister, Kimberly, apparently introduced her to this profession. They worked together in Long Island for 5 years, making insane money and just loving it and traveling and like doing so many things with the money that they made. But unfortunately, Amber became addicted to heroin and ended up working just to pay for her drug habit.
Yeah.
And then when Amber went missing, her sister didn't file a missing persons report because she knew that it wouldn't be taken seriously. And she had kind of thought that Amber had just found someone to get high with.
That's unfortunate.
It
You would
is really
hope that, like,
unfortunate.
even if they're not going to do something with it, at least a report's been filed and at least it's there.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
dealing with law enforcement in that circumstance is difficult as is. So I can understand.
Yeah. Especially when you are also a sex worker.
Yes.
So they are already like, no.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, please.
Please.
Yeah. So that's really unfortunate. It's very much the sad truth of it all.
Yeah.
Which sucks.
Yeah.
But either way, on September 2nd at 12:05 a.m., a client came to Amber's house. And I didn't really understand the timeline of this. I didn't know if he was supposed to come to the house or if he showed up unannounced. But her and her male roommate were able to trick him into leaving by having her roommate act as an outraged boyfriend.
Smart.
So they were able to get him out of the home, which leads me to think he wasn't welcome there.
Yeah,
Right.
that's kind of how it sounds.
Yeah, but he came with money for her, which she kept.
Hmm. I mean,
So,
I would
I don't
too.
really know.
I would too. If you're
Yeah.
coming to my house, you're making a scene though, I'm going to take your money and you can just leave.
Yeah, and like
Thank
maybe
you.
he was invited, but like they finished like the service, whatever. Maybe he just refused to leave. Like I feel like there's so many options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really have no idea what happened. But later that day, she was contacted by the same burner phone of the person who showed up at their house. She ended up leaving her house without her purse or cell phone and without her roommate, who would usually go on calls with her for safety. She left home at around midnight. So a whole day has passed, walked down the street and was just never seen again. Her roommate, Dave Schaller, told police that on that night she went missing, a client had offered her $1,500 for the night, which was 6 times her hourly rate. So really good money. He described this client as relentless because he called her several times and was on the phone for quite a while each time. He also said that he was between 6'4" and 6'6" in height and had big oval style 1970s glasses and looked like an ogre.
Nice.
Accurate description. And he also drove a first generation Chevrolet Avalanche, which he noticed driving past their house shortly after Amber left the house to go meet her client.
I will say, knowledge in cars, so underrated. Like, if you know that a car is a first generation Chevrolet Avalanche, good on you. I wish I had that knowledge. I'd be like, a tan truck that's kind of round, maybe.
It's kind of ugly.
Yeah, I feel like you would be able to pick it out because it's such a unique looking vehicle. You would be able to pick it out on a photograph. If you're like, okay, I've seen this car around, and then when you see another one, you're like, okay, I know it's a Chevy Avalanche. Okay, great.
Yeah.
This was also the same vehicle that was seen when Jessica Taylor's body was dumped back in 2000.
Oh.
So we have a connection. This isn't a picture of his vehicle. His was dark green, I guess. This is just one that I found to show you guys what
I see.
okay. Looks like.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yes. Okay, so that brings us to December 2010. On December 11th, 2010, a police officer and his K9, who was named Blue, were performing a training exercise when they ended up finding human remains near Gilgo Beach. And these remains were identified as Melissa Barthelme. And so Gilgo Beach is on this stretch of coastline on Long Island along Ocean Parkway. It's on the southeastern side of New York. It was very confusing trying to find the differences between Long Island and New York City and XYZ because they're just kind of all the same. regardless, 2 days later, on December 13th, they searched the beach again and found 3 more sets of bones. These sets were each wrapped in burlap and left 500 meters apart and 50 feet from the edge of the road. They were bound with belts and or tape, which ended up trapping hairs that were later used as DNA evidence to connect the bodies to the Long Island serial killer.
Wow.
These remains were identified as Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Amber Costello, and Megan Waterman.
It's interesting that it noted that they were all 500 meters apart. Like, I assume that was intentional, but
Yeah.
I'm
Very specific.
It's specific. It's like whether or not he actually like measured that out, like weird.
Right? Yeah, it seemed like they were very evenly placed apart.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird.
Yeah. It's like he was making a graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, literally. And then on December 14th, it was announced that police were looking for a serial killer. It was clear that the killer had a type, as all the victims were very petite. They were all 5 feet tall or shorter,
Wow.
and they weighed roughly 100 pounds. They all worked on as online escorts and were in their 20s. And so Shannon hasn't been found yet, but it's important to note that without her, there wouldn't have been an investigation, and these women might have never been found, because it was like the police were in that area looking for her.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then in the spring of 2011, 6 more sets of remains were discovered along Gilgo Beach in that same area.
Wow.
Victim number 5 was identified as Jessica Taylor. Her skull, arms, and hands were found March 29th, 2011, less than a mile east of the Gilgo Beach 4. Her partial remains were found in Manorville in 2003 and are thought to be linked to Valerie Mack because their remains were found a half a mile apart in Manorville. I talk a little bit more about Valerie Mack later on. Victim number 6 was identified as unidentified at that time. They found her skull, hands, and right foot at this location, with the rest of her remains found in Manorville in 2000. Her remains were found 1.5 miles from Jessica Taylor's remains on the beach. So victim number 6 is later identified as Valerie Mack. So their bodies were found super close together in this wooded area, but then also super close together on this beach. So it's clear that they were put there by the same person, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Victim number 7 was a toddler girl. I don't know specifically what age she was. Victim number 8 was an Asian male found in women's clothing. He was about 17 to 23 years old and had died 5 to 10 years prior to being found. Victims 6, 7, 8 were found April 4th, 2011. Victim number 9 was a female skull that belonged to Karen Vergata, who disappeared in 1996. She was referred to as the Fire Island Jane Doe, or Jane Doe number 7, until she was identified on August 4th, 2023 through genetic genealogy.
Wow.
Which is really cool. Victim number 10 was identified as the mother to the toddler who was found 6 miles away.
Oh, man.
Her partial remains were first discovered in 1997 in Hempstead Lake Park.
I was wondering about that
Park.
because the toddler seemed very much not the MO.
Very much so. So the toddler, the Asian male, and the mother have not been linked to the Long Island serial killer. They just happen to be found along the same stretch of beach.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm. And so Karen Vergata and the mother were found April 11th, 2011. This is just an image of how far apart they were all found.
Okay, yeah. So you definitely see a condensed area with the victims, the confirmed victims of the Long Island serial killer, and then the others are a bit more dispersed down.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And then December 2011, investigators finally found Shannon Gilbert's remains. However, they do not believe that she was murdered. They think that she had ran into the marsh and drowned. However, her family firmly believe that she was murdered. And like I said, without her, though, a lot of these women might never have been found. So we still need to kind of like appreciate her sacrifice in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, we jump ahead many years, May 28th, 2020, Jane Doe number 6's remains were identified as Valerie Mack through genetic genealogy as well. Valerie was 24 years old when she went missing, and she had a son who would have been 7 at that time.
7 in 2020 or 7 when she went?
7 when she went missing.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Sorry, yeah. She was born June 2nd, 1976 in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and she was placed in foster care from an early age before being adopted by the Mack family. She was working in the sex industry at that time of her disappearance in Philadelphia and Atlantic City. And like the other victims, she advertised online and would also walk the streets for work. Jumping ahead again to February 2022, a new task force was formed by the Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison and Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney to investigate the Gilgo Beach victims. And miraculously, 6 weeks after the formation of this task force, on March 14th, 2022, Rex Heuermann was identified as a suspect for the first time.
It's
Which is
crazy that it took them this long to put together a task force to like figure out who might have killed these missing women. And it was within 6 weeks that they found something, like had a real genuine lead.
And I kind of get into why it took so long to even get this task force, which I just put together as you said that. So how were they able to find a name of a person within 6 weeks of forming this task force? It was largely thanks to Dave Schaller's description of the client and his vehicle. So they had a description of someone and a vehicle to look for. So they combined this with all the phone calls that the women had received from the burner phones, and they were able to trace each of these calls to cell towers in Massapequa Park as well as Midtown Manhattan, and they created this small radius that they referred to as the box. I don't really know the science behind tracing a call to a cell tower or whatever, so I don't really know why they weren't able to do it when Shannon called and how they're able to do it now. I don't really know if it was just they were able to get call logs or something. I don't really know. But either way, they were able to identify Rex Heuermann as the person responsible for these murders. When they looked at his cell phone records, they saw that he was in the same area at the same time the burner phones called the women. He lived in Massapequa Park and worked in Midtown Manhattan. And there was a ton of other cell phone evidence that I'm not going to talk about, but the source that I found it in will be on our website and it will be labeled so you guys can go read it. So police started tailing Heuermann, and they were able to collect DNA evidence from a pizza box that he threw out and compare it to the hair that they found on Megan Waterman's body. This DNA matched, so they were able to make an arrest on July 13th, 2023. And when he was arrested, he was in possession of a burner phone that comes into play a little later. So July 14th, 2023, Rex Heuermann is in custody. He was charged with the first and second degree murder in the deaths of Melissa Barthelme, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. He is currently the prime suspect of Maureen Brainerd Barnes' death, but has not yet been charged. He pleaded not guilty to all charges and is waiting without bail in a Suffolk County jail for trial. He was under suicide watch during his time in the jail. So, a little bit about him. He was the president of RH Consultants and Associates, which is an architecture firm that operates out of Midtown Manhattan. He founded this company in 1994, but has worked in the architecture industry since 1987. He has been married twice. I have no information on his first wife, but his second wife, there's no information about him online. I cannot find him. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page. He's not on Murderpedia. Everything is just linked. Like every time you Google his name, just the same links for the Gilgo Beach 4 show up.
I guess it's just because of how new. I mean, the case itself is very much not new based on how long they've been finding bodies, but he was only named like 2 years ago or less.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
So it made researching him very difficult, but that's okay. So his second wife is Asa Ellerup. They have a 26-year-old daughter and a stepson together. I'm not sure how old the stepson is, and I'm just by the phrasing of the sentence, I'm going to assume that his second wife had him before getting married to Heuermann. Asa is from Iceland and often was visiting her family when these crimes were occurring. Like she and the kids were out of town whenever he would commit these murders.
That makes sense why she wouldn't suspect anything then.
Yeah, exactly. And so he lives roughly a 20-minute drive from Gilgo Beach in Massapequa Park. This property was his childhood home, so he was born and raised on Long Island. His neighbors described his house as a dump.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah. They also described him as a family man and said that his family, quote, made no imprint at all on the neighborhood, end quote.
Okay.
Which is kind of such a backhanded compliment, I guess. They said he was a quiet neighbor and never really bothered anybody, but other neighbors said that they told their kids to avoid his house on Halloween because he's not a very nice person. So it just depended on the person you talk to, pretty much. Yeah. He was 59 years old at the time of arrest, so I believe he's 60 or 61 now. And that's all I could find. So back to July 2023, police spent 12 days searching his house.
Wow.
Yeah. They found guns in his basement and a first-generation Chevy Avalanche. And also, he had properties in both South Carolina and Las Vegas. So the local detectives there are taking a fresh look at missing women cases, just in case he was responsible for the murder of anyone else in those states.
Wow.
They seized over 350 electronic devices.
Who has that many electronic devices?
Wow.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's so many. And 300 guns.
Why do you need that many? How do you acquire
why was that not
many?
a red flag to begin with? Like, this man has 300 guns. That's so many.
How do you store 300 guns?
Right?
Not safely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not up to code.
Yeah. So wild. They also found DNA evidence because it's his house. Mm-hmm. They found a, quote, significant collection of violent bondage and torture pornography, end quote, dating back to 1994 on his computer hard drive and other devices that belonged to him. Some of the collection shows pornographic images that are consistent with the crime scenes of some of his victims. So it seemed like he was basing what he was doing to these women on the porn that he was seeing.
That's
Oh,
gross.
so it wasn't like pornographic material he made from the victims, or
I don't think so.
okay.
But yeah. And then jumping ahead to last year, January 16th, 2024, Heuermann was linked to the death of Maureen Brainerd Barnes via DNA from a female hair found in the buckle of a belt used to bind her ankles. This female hair ended up matching his wife or his daughter, who were both out of town during the murder, so it's being used as evidence of the crime occurring at his home.
That's so eerie.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Oh.
A lot of the hairs found on the women's bodies were of his wife or his daughter or the woman he was living with at the time. Yeah.
Ugh.
It's icky.
I don't like that.
So he's being charged with second-degree murder of Maureen. In February 2024, the hair that they found underneath Jessica Taylor was found to be Heuermann's, linking him to her death, as well as the hairs on Sandra Castilla's body were identified as belonging to Heuermann and the woman he was living with shortly before the time of her disappearance and murder, also linking him to her death. At the time that Sandra went missing, the woman he was living with at the time had moved out of their house, and so it's not thought that she participated in the murder at all. And then we get to March 2024, when police were able to recover a Microsoft Word document that Heuermann used to, quote, methodically blueprint his killings, end quote. He tried to delete it, but investigators were able to recover it on his hard drive, and it includes a checklist that involves steps to complete before, during, and after killings.
Idiot.
Jesus.
Yeah.
You shouldn't.
So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't have anything to say. I just, anyone that's using like a program like Google Docs or Microsoft Documents to prepare your murder is not right.
And I have it, so we can look at it.
Oh, good.
It's, yeah. So how they were able to find it. This was interesting because I didn't know this. So when a user deletes data, many users believe that the file has been purged forever. However, deleting a file only tells the computer that the space previously occupied by that file is now available.
Mm-hmm.
So the deleted data will remain in the unallocated space until another file is written over it.
Huh.
And so this data contained within unallocated space can be retrieved via a computer forensic extraction method called file carving.
Wow.
Which I didn't know. I thought that was very cool.
That sounds fancy.
So there's our forensics.
That does sound fancy.
So this is if you go to the next slide, this is his planning document.
I hate that it's all in capitals. Why are you, that bothers me so much for no reason. When people
extra aggressive.
Yeah.
And there's tons of spelling mistakes, which I find interesting for someone who runs his own like architecture firm. Like I thought he would be very detail oriented that way.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It goes into problems, supplies, DS, which I assume is dumpster site or dump site.
Yep.
TRG,
which is target.
Oh, okay.
And so something I thought was interesting was in the bail applications that I was reading that I got this from, they don't mention the fact that Megan's name is the first one listed under target.
T1, Megan, ?
Oh my God.
So I don't know what that means. Okay. So notes, that's actually an interesting spot because the page numbers and notes that he has written there are from the Mindhunter book written by John Douglas.
What?
So he read that book and was like tabbing pages with how to get away with this murder.
Oh my God.
Don't like that. That's not, don't use the book for that reason.
Yeah.
No.
And so it adds evidence as to like the self-education and homework that he put into like planning this murder. And it makes me feel so icky because I also have that book. I know like the three of us each have that book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it really made me look at the books that I have with like a little bit of a side eye.
Yeah. And how it can be, the information can be used negatively or misconstrued.
Yeah. And so he's like, if I do these things, then it'll come across as an organized killer or a disorganized killer. Like,
yeah, that's actually, sorry, I'm still looking at the notes, and there's just so much you can now see that, like, obviously he got from Mindhunter. Like, look at the quote painting. What, why, who?
Yeah.
Like, the more you do, the more clues you give. Oh.
Yeah.
Ew.
Not good.
Yeah.
Not good at all.
Just for our listeners too, I guess, like some of the other sections that they have too. So yeah, you got the problem, supplies, dump site, target, but you also have pre-prep, prep, post-event. Again, dots under, or sorry, that's a Canadian thing, bullet points under each thing. But yeah, then there's notes, recon reports, body prep, dispose of the following, things to remember, take down, pickup. Ow.
Yeah. And he has like lots of like under problems. He has DNA, tire marks, fingerprints.
Yeah.
Like witness, shoe prints.
Photos?
Under post event, delete or dispose of pictures, destroy file, change tires, have a story set.
Yeah.
Okay, it's scary that he was like even thinking about his tires though, because those very much have been used. Like,
yeah.
I feel like most criminals wouldn't even think about their tire marks. Like,
well,
right.
And even in pre-prep, so much to say is like, doing recon of disposal site 1, locate disposal site 2. You're looking for a weather report. You're looking for a recon
Video
on vid
cameras.
cameras. You're doing a recon on pickup or pick zones for vid cameras. So like the thought and like deliberate planning that went into all of this is
Frightening.
Yes, that is a good term.
Even like remove identification marks, like tattoos, marks, remove the head and hands. Like he was removing identifying features of these women. Like, yeah. So this is very, very, very damning evidence for him.
Like things to remember. Sound travels. Control the amount of air in and out to control noise.
Use heavy rope for neck. Light rope broke under stress of being tightened.
Like the nitty gritty aspects of everything. He's like planning what could go wrong. If it does go wrong, what to do then? Like a backup plan for a backup plan.
And like, oh, I did this last time. It didn't work. Let's try something else. Yeah. So this document was created in 2000, which is the same year that Valerie Mack died. So they used this document to further tie him to her death.
Right.
And it's been edited extensively over the year and gives us a very disturbing idea of how these women may have died. From this document, the investigators were able to learn that he can be classified as a power/control killer.
Makes sense.
And so these types of killers are psychopathic and obsessed with detail and planning and often have a plan for everything, as we see with this document.
Yeah.
And so they also searched the burner phone that he had on him when he was arrested and found some fucked up information.
Oh.
So this really disturbed me. He was logged into a Gmail address on this phone, so they were able to look and see his search history, which included thousands of searches related to sex workers, sadistic, torture-related porn, as well as child porn.
Oh, God.
I have the list. I'm going to post it on our website. I am not going to read it out loud. I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
He also searched over 200 times things related to active and known serial killers, the disappearance of the Gilgo Four, and the investigation into their murders. I will also post some of the ones that they outlined on our website.
I will say, obviously, taking into consideration everything else we know about this guy, not great. If you were to come across us and see 200 times search it, like, of serial killers and stuff, we'd be like, okay, but why? What's the context here? Thankfully, we don't have any. We don't have any documents on how to kill people.
I think about it every time I'm doing research for this podcast in a public place.
Yeah.
Like, please don't look over my shoulder, please.
Yeah.
I will forever be mentally scared from the time I was in an airport searching up research for a case. I'm like, I'm on a watch list this minute.
Right?
Every search that is being done right now is flagged.
Yeah. And they have so much access to everything. So yeah, he's very much like trying to stay up to date with the investigation into the Long Island serial killer. I'm assuming just so that he knows when to expect them to knock on his door.
Fair.
He also had this AOL account where he had taken pictures of himself and sent them to people to solicit and arrange for sex. The only reason I smirk when I say that is because it's under an alias and he tries to be like, that's not mine. Brother, there's a photo of you.
That's your face, sir.
That's your face. It's also my understanding that he had a Tinder profile under the name Andy Roberts, which was an alias that he also used when talking to sex workers or other people looking for sex with him. He used that name. He had a bunch of different aliases.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Each of his emails and burner phones were registered under these aliases. On March 29th, 2004, they were able to analyze a female hair that was found on Valerie's wrist that came from Huerman's daughter, who would have been 3 or 4 at the time of her disappearance. So again, just using that as evidence that these murders were committed in his home. And then April 2024, a week-long search of the woods in Manorville, New York occurred as a result of finding the planning document and his listing that wooded area was a dump site. I guess luckily they didn't find anything, but this reinforced their idea that the planning document was referring to his preparations for Jessica Taylor and or Valerie Mack. May 20th, 2024, police served another search warrant on the Huerman home where they found a newspaper from 1993 that talked about finding Sandra Costilla's partial remains and a 2003 newspaper that talked about the disappearance and murder of Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor. Rather damning things to have in your home.
Yeah, who's keeping that?
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah, especially when it's not like there was a ton of 1993 newspapers. It was like those ones.
Just those. Like his own trophy in a way.
He kept a lot of trophies.
Oh. God.
He fit every single stereotype for a serial killer. And then on June 6, 2024, the 1993 murder of Sandra Castilla and the 2003 murder of Jessica Taylor are both linked to Huerman. He is charged with second-degree murder in both of their deaths. On July 30th, 2024, Huerman appeared in a Suffolk County courtroom. His attorney, Michael Brown, plans to file a motion to separate the cases so that the charges for the Gilgo Beach 4 are tried separately from Taylor and Sandra.
No, just put them all together. If he did it, just
all together. Yeah.
Are they trying them separately, though, to ensure a higher probability of him being charged and then he gets additional sentences?
No, because this is his defense attorney.
Oh.
So I think he's trying to be like...
I skimmed over that, yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. If he's tried for 7 women, the likelihood of him killing them is quite high. But if he's only tried for 4 and then another 3, perhaps he didn't kill them all, kind of thing.
Gotcha. I'm following now.
That's my understanding.
I'm following. Yep.
His defense attorney also raised concerns about the DNA testing performed on the hair strands tying Huerman to the bodies, arguing that the scientific techniques has not been generally accepted as reliable in the scientific community. Something I thought was interesting with that was he was only trying to, or maybe this was just how it read, but it sounded like they were only trying to get rid of the nuclear DNA evidence, not the mitochondrial DNA evidence, which they did both for each set or for each piece of hair.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know why, but like it doesn't really change anything because he still has a planning document where he like admits how to murder. Anyway, he also said that he might request a change of venue to avoid a biased jury, which fair.
Yeah.
On October 16th, 2023, the government has frozen assets from the Suffolk County DA's office as part of a separate investigation involving the previous DAs. So they froze up $13 million, which is seriously affecting the Huerman case, which is why it's taking so long. But I think that's also why it took so long to even find him.
Yeah.
I think that's very possible.
The previous 2 DAs sounded like not great.
Maybe a little corruption.
Yeah. Well, I know the mayor of New York right now is charged with like corruption and bribery and all that jazz.
Wow.
Not surprising.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're in some deep shit right now. So that makes sense. The timeline is making out.
Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like the 2 district attorneys prior to Mr. Tierney are sketchy individuals.
Yeah.
But so far, Mr. Tierney seems to be doing a good job. So yay.
That's good.
It's just weird that like they can't do the case or like I'm worried that it's going to affect this case because they don't have the money to do it right.
Yeah. Fair.
And they're rushing it in a sense. Anyway, it's just a whole big thing. It's not ideal. On December 17th, 2024, Huerman was charged with second-degree murder in the death of Valerie Mack. He was due back in court on January 15th, but has been postponed until January 29th. I'm not sure why. That's the day before this episode comes out. So, we might have... I'm going to try and see how much... like if anything happens because of that, so then we can kind of post it at the same time as the episode so that our listeners have the most up-to-date information. And so the trial hasn't actually started. All of this has just been pre-trial hearings. Depending on the amount of evidence during these hearings, his murder trial could start either later this year or in early 2026. Either way, I'm really going to try and stay updated on this case so that we can actually give updates as well.
Yeah.
And then maybe when the trial finishes, we might be able to do another updated episode or something, depending on how many more women he gets tied to.
Yeah.
Mhm. And what comes out during the trial.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have some thoughts. That's all of the information. These are just some thoughts that I have. Everyone that the women brought with them for safety ended up not going with them on the night they were taken / killed. Which
Stick
I think
with your
really
friends.
Yeah.
Especially
think
if they're
like,
sex workers. Sorry. Just
Yeah.
I think they in general need more protection and to be looked out for than like a lot of other populations.
Yeah.
Well, you're working a very dangerous job. Like,
Exactly.
have someone there to protect you.
Yeah.
Do you think that was done purposefully? Do you think
I
there
don't
was
know.
something in his master plan that caused him to separate them from these men?
Yeah, I do think so. I don't know if there's anything, because like with Megan's boyfriend, like I don't know if he was in on it or if that was just like a coincidence.
Yeah.
But even on the 911 phone call of Shannon, even though she hasn't been confirmed as a victim of his, she's very convinced that the client and her driver have teamed up to kill her.
Wow.
So it feels like there's something else going on there.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Either way, not ideal. His wife did file for divorce after he was arrested, so that's good.
Good. Get away from him.
And then, yeah, right? Like, that's crazy. She said she had no idea what was going on, XYZ. And then I already mentioned this, but all the murders occurred during times when his wife and children were out of town, either in Iceland visiting family or visiting friends in different states.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I cannot
and then
imagine someone being so good at lying that, like, you don't think there's anything wrong when you go to visit your family. And meanwhile, like, the love of your life is just back there being an entirely abhorrent human being. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like he was calling like on his phone logs, he calls them to like check up on them. Like, hey, how's it going? Like, hope your trip is nice.
Yeah. My God.
Meanwhile, he's just at home trying to kill these sex workers.
What the heck?
But yeah, so that's all I have pretty much. It's kind of a wild case. It really upset me very deeply.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was just because of the gruesomeness of the case or I happened to be reading Bright Young Women, which is about the Ted Bundy case.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just, I didn't like it. But that's it.
Well, thank you very much. It's interesting to see the amount of new evidence that's come to light too, since we kind of touched on it before. And with all of the cases that we've done kind of in between too, like this was a case, many of which, like once we present them, it's kind of gone from my memory. Like I don't spend a lot of time obsessing over them and like remembering all of the facts. And so to get the information we were kind of familiar with, but also paired with what's come out since, is very, very fascinating.
Yeah, because I really didn't know a lot. Like, besides what we covered back in 2021, no, I'm exactly the same. Like, I know about the case, I know the gist, but
yeah,
it was good to learn more. Plus, everything that come out, because oh my God, it's only been like 3 years since we covered it.
Yeah,
and everything so much more.
Basically, half of this whole case was after we covered it too.
Yeah,
right. Like all of the 2022 onward stuff.
Oh yeah, I meant to re-listen to that episode so that I could kind of like talk about what we had thought.
Yeah,
because I vaguely remember talking about some of the quote unquote suspects in the case that like the family members of the Gilgo Beach 4 were like, these are the people who did it.
Yeah.
And I think we even talked about the Joseph Bitrolf guy. Yeah, because he's the carpenter killer or whatever.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
But yeah, I didn't get a chance to. But it's cool that, well, not cool, but it's what a time to be alive to watch this unfold. Like we always,
it's strange.
hear about like the Ted Bundy case and how much that like took the world by storm, or even the Green River Killer, like, and Robert Pickton, and like all of these things. And then it's weird to think that it's 2025 and serial killers are still being found and charged.
Yeah. That being said, too, though, I can't say that it's ever come across my feed in the past 2-3 years.
Yep.
Which is baffling to me with the amount of information that we've just learned and that is coming to light. And like, I get that it's an ongoing trial and like some information cannot be shared. Sure, whatever. But like, maybe an article I saw LISK on, but like, you would think that it would be more readily spoken about.
Yeah. Yeah, because you have to think about, like, they caught a serial killer who is connected to like 8 women.
Yeah.
Like, how are we not hearing about this?
Right? Yeah.
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 Yeah. If it wasn't for that Dateline NBC like weekly recap that I listened to, I wouldn't have known anything was happening. But
yeah, exactly.
Thanks Dateline. Thanks NBC.
But even for you to have mentioned that like December 17th, 2024, he was charged with second-degree murder and the death of Valerie Mack. Huh? Yeah. Like a month ago? Sorry. Where was
like
this?
He's still being charged with the deaths of these women. And so it just needs to be talked about more.
And he should have been in court almost 10 days ago, but now it's postponed until the 29th this month. Like 6 days,
6 days from
recording day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Or yesterday when this episode comes out. Like
Yeah.
Like it's wild.
Oh my
that
gosh.
It's still going on.
Oh my goodness.
It's just starting.
It's just starting too, because if we have all of these, I don't know if issues would be the right word with the DA and funding and whatnot, how is that going to impact timeline? You know, and then like, what is the timing for the charges not to be null, but you know how after a certain amount of time, it's like it removes the defendant's right to a timely and fair trial or something?
Yeah, I know that's the Jordan ruling in Canada. I don't know if the States has that or not.
Okay, I hope not, because I've heard about it in Canada and it's just like, it's so silly. It's like,
oh yeah,
it's the court's issue for things taking so long. And so I find like criminals kind of just ride that wave out. And
I read a statistic recently, and I could be inflating it. I'm misremembering a little. It was either cases for all of Canada or cases only in Ontario. But because of the Jordan ruling making it like 2 years, whatever, 53% of all criminal cases got thrown out. I think last year, 2023.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I just heard of one in Nova Scotia. It was like a sexual assault, or I don't know if it was the taxi driver one, but similar thing with the 2 years. It was just he couldn't get a date, kept being postponed, and then like the final postponement put him past the 2 years. So he was like, okay, cool,
free to go, even though I'm guilty. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yikes. That's so scary. I didn't know that was a thing. I don't like that at all.
It came into place, I think, in 2016, but I think 2016, but like it wasn't super duper talked about until COVID, because the courts weren't mega delayed before COVID. Like they were bad, but not this bad.
Yeah. Yikes.
Oh, man,
that's shocking that got put through. Because like I understand everyone's right to a fair trial.
Yeah.
But I also cannot support having a killer just go, or a rapist or XYZ just out there.
Yeah. No, I agree.
That taxi driver, like, yikes. No, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for enlightening us about all of this. And thank you for really focusing on like the victims too. And like, I know that there wasn't a lot about the Long Island serial killer himself, but just in terms of like who these women were and that they were women and this was kind of their life too. So I really appreciate that. Rebecca, do you have a little something for us?
I do. And I'm just going to preface it by saying this is a bit of an overview of the study that I found, because I, as of now, don't know where to find the real study. So this is coming from Live Science. They posted this literally like this morning. It's like a brand new research article that came out, which is why I think I can't find anything. So there will be a better write-up for the Forensic Friday on our Instagram with like some pictures and more information about the science. But there was a group of scientists who were sequencing genomes of Neanderthals who lived between 120 and 20,000 years ago. Like, you know, the skulls or whatever, they tested their DNA. And I'm not positive the reason this was being done, again, because the article I read was just really a summary.
Yeah.
But they discovered when they were looking at the genomes, so they sequenced Neanderthal genomes of like a few dozen samples, but then also of groups of Homo sapien samples from the same time period and Denisovans, which were another group of almost human species similar to Neanderthals. And they determined that in the Neanderthal blood, they had a really rare type of mutation on like the Rh antigen, which for us today, just super simply, the Rh antigen is what determines whether your blood is positive or negative. And so this seemingly really rare Rh mutation wasn't actually all that rare amongst the sample of Neanderthals that they were reviewing. And so they determined that like this variant or this mutation never really popped up in Homo sapien genomes, and we just kind of kept expanding. They believe it was because we moved all over, but they had said that if a female Neanderthal were to mate with a male Homo sapien or Denisovan, it was a very, very high risk pregnancy that could result in a hemolytic disease in the newborn, which is like a blood disease, which could ultimately lead to jaundice, severe anemia, brain damage, and death. So basically, they hypothesized that because Neanderthals and humans were inbreeding for so long, and also that Neanderthals were like inbreeding with themselves, they basically just continued mutating this new variant of the Rh antigen, which resulted in like more and more children being born with these hemolytic diseases, which could have led to the decline in Neanderthals and why they might not be around today.
Crazy.
That was a whirlwind, and I know it was I'm kind of just spewing words.
No.
But yeah, I'll have like way more sciencey sounding version of this in our Forensic Friday Instagram post. And I'll try to find more like the actual study to read about it. But yeah, basically they suspect that one of the reasons Neanderthals didn't survive despite other similar species surviving was because of a rare blood mutation that got increasingly more common in Neanderthals.
That's crazy.
That's my forensic corner.
That still happens today, hey?
Really?
If your baby is a different blood type than you or like different enough, it can kill the mother and the baby. Like it's super rare, but it can cause like a bunch of issues. It's super scary.
That
is what that is exactly related to Rh. So if I think the mother is Rh negative, but they're having a child who's Rh positive or vice versa, the mom has to take like a whole series of like prenatal vitamins and like immunosuppressants or something. Because otherwise, the mom and baby could die because they're incompatible blood types.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's really fascinating though, because I feel like anytime that I've heard about like the downfall or the decline of Neanderthals, it's just, they didn't evolve like we did. They just didn't have like the capabilities, or they didn't have the function or brain power. I don't know, XYZ. So it's interesting to have another theory added to that through this DNA research.
Yeah, and they were saying that like maybe the reason that humans evolved past this mutation was because this was around the same time that humans or Homo sapiens were starting to try to spread upwards towards like Europe instead of staying in Africa.
Yeah.
But Neanderthals were largely an isolated group. They didn't try expanding and exploring, and so they think their genomes basically just kind of got stuck, whereas humans continued meeting new groups of human and coming into contact with like new fauna and flora. And
that is really, really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
I love learning something new every time we meet. This is great. Okay, thank you both for always increasing my brain capacity. Our next topic, it'll be quite close to Valentine's Day. So we have a fun little thing planned for you guys. If you are interested in learning more about, the sources that we've mentioned or seeing our Forensic Friday posts, keeping up to date when episodes come out, you can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok at What the Forensics. Our website is whattheforensics.ca. This is where, again, we have our sources. A little bit about us. We like to say it's our one-stop shop, everything WTF. And we also have our email, whattheforensics@gmail.com, for any questions, comments, concerns, or fun things you've heard about, because we've had a couple people reach out to us, and it's really fun to hear what you guys have to say, and we learn a lot from you guys as well. So we really appreciate that. With all of that being said, this has been yet another episode of What the Forensics. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Just a reminder to everyone that we are not professionals in the forensic science field. We are just interested in forensics and want to share what we are learning with our listeners. We're trying to give you the most accurate information, but we are human and can make mistakes. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next week.